Hey guys, welcome to another Saturday Night Stories. This week I'm going to read from Ulysses, and I'm excited about it. But first, I want to talk about why I chose this book, and the reason is, and you may not know this, me and my best friend Catherine often read to each other. We've been reading to each other for a really long time. She lives in Germany, and so we just read chapters from books and Dropbox them to each other, and this is kind of one of the ways that I got started in ASMR, is just listening to our audiobooks that we made by ourselves, and it's really enjoyable. And so Ulysses is our latest project. We've read all of the Murakami stories to each other, and yeah, it's really fun. And she doesn't really have any interest in making ASMR videos, but she has a great voice for it, and has that Eastern European German accent that works so well for some people. It's too bad that she doesn't want to read for you guys. But, you know, whatever. I hope everybody has had a really good week. I'm hoping that this week's story is going to go a little bit better than last week's. You may have noticed I did have some technical difficulties last week, and then some frustration following about people not reading video descriptions. I want to be associated with quality and thoroughness, professionalism, but I didn't have a chance to re-record the video, and I'm sorry that I had to put a screen grab on instead of the video, because it was really bad. It was really flickery and staticky. It was bizarre. I'm not really sure why it happened, but it's just, it was frustrating. So I hope that this goes better. So like I said, we have Ulysses, and we have Sam Adams' Boston Lager. That's okay. I've had it before. It's kind of one of the few things I have left. This opener is too small. That side didn't work either. Bizarre. Boston Lager is usually pretty fizzy. So as you can see, good fizz, amber color. It smells like a Pilsner, really. Honestly, it smells like an American beer, which it is branded as such, so that does make sense. Foamy. It's actually better than I remember. Foam face. So that intro, this intro, is a little bit longer than normal, but it is also necessary, I feel. I have a great idea for a future video coming up on board games. So look for that really soon, maybe tomorrow or something. I'm really hoping that I get a chance this weekend. My brother is done with school starting right now, and so he'll be home tomorrow, and he tends to interrupt the recording process a lot. So here's to hoping that he's really busy and I get to keep recording undisturbed. Alright. Ulysses. Chapter 1. Stately, plump Buck Mulligan came from the stairhead bearing a bowl of lather, on which a mirror and a razor lay crossed. A yellow dressing gown, ungirdled, was sustained gently behind him on the mild morning air. He held the bowl aloft and intoned, Intro lipo ad altare Dei. Halted, he peered down the dark winding stairs and called out coarsely, Come up, Kinch, come up, you fearful Jesuit. Solemnly, he came forward and mounted the round gun rest. He faced about and blessed gravely thrice the tower, the surrounding land. Kindle just shut off. And the awaking mountains. Then, catching sight of Stephen Dedalus, he bent toward him and made rapid crosses in the air, gurgling in his throat and shaking his head. Stephen Dedalus, displeased and sleepy, leaned his arms on top of the staircase and looked coldly at the shaking, gurgling face that blessed him, equine in its length, and at the light, untonsured hair, grained and hued like pale oak. Buck Mulligan peeped an instant under the mirror and then covered the bowl smartly. Back to barracks, he said sternly. He added in a preacher's tone, For this, O dearly beloved, is the genuine Christine, body and soul, and blood and ounce. Slow music, please. Shut your eyes, gents. One moment. A little trouble about those white corpuscles. Silence all. He peered sideways up and gave a long, slow whistle of call, then paused a while in rapt attention, his even white teeth glistening here and there with gold points. Chrysostomos. 2 strong, shrill whistles answered throughout the calm. Thanks, old chap, he cried briskly. That'll do nicely. Switch off the current, will you? He skipped off the gun rest and looked gravely at the watcher, gathering about his legs in the loose folds of his gown. The plump, shadowed face and sullen oval jowl recalled a prelate, patron of arts in the Middle Ages. A pleasant smile broke quietly over his lips. The mockery of it, he said gaily. Your absurd name, an ancient Greek. He pointed his finger in friendly jest and went over to the parapet, laughing to himself. Stephen Dedalus stepped up, followed him wearily halfway, and sat down on the edge of the gun rest, watching him still as he propped the mirror on the parapet. Dipped the brush in the bowl, and lathered cheeks and neck. Buck Mulligan's gay voice went on. My name is absurd, too. Malachi Mulligan. 2 dactyls. But it has a Hellenic ring, hasn't it? Tripping and sunny like the Buck himself. We must go to Athens. Will you come if I can get the aunt to fork out 20 quid? He laid the brush aside and laughing with delight, cried, Will he come, the jejune Jesuit? Ceasing, he began to shave with care. Tell me, Mulligan, Stephen said quietly. Yes, my love. How long is Haynes going to stay in this tower? Buck Mulligan showed a shaven cheek over his right shoulder. God, isn't he dreadful, he said frankly. A ponderous Saxon. He thinks you're not a gentleman. God, these bloody English, bursting with money and indigestion, because he comes from Oxford. You know, Dedalus, you have the real Oxford manner. He can't make you out. Oh, my name for you is the best. Kinch, the knife blade. He shaved warily over his chin. He was raving all night about a black panther, Stephen said. Where's his gun case? A woeful lunatic, Mulligan said. Were you in a funk? I was, Stephen said, with energy and growing fear. Out here in the dark with a man I don't know, raving and moaning to himself about shooting a black panther. You've saved men from drowning. I'm not a hero, however. If he stays on here, I am off. Buck Mulligan frowned at the lather on his razor blade. He hopped down from his perch and began to search his trouser pockets hastily. Scotter, he cried, thickly. He came over to the gun rest and, thrusting a hand into Stephen's upper pocket, said, Lend us a loan of your nose rag to wipe my razor. Stephen suffered him to pull out and hold up, on show by its corner, a dirty, crumpled handkerchief. Buck Mulligan wiped the razor blade neatly. Then, gazing over the handkerchief, he said, The bard's nose rag, a new art color for our Irish poets. Snot green, you can almost taste it, can't you? He mounted the parapet again, and gazed out over Dublin Bay, his fair oak-pale hair stirring slightly. God, he said quietly, isn't the sea what Algie calls a great, sweet mother? The snot-green sea, the scrotum-tightening sea, Epe, Onipa, Ponton. Ah, Daedalus, the Greeks, I must teach you, you must read them in the original, the Lada. She is our great sweet mother. Come and look. Stephen stood up and went over to the parapet. Leaning on it, he looked down on the water and on the mailboat clearing the harbor mouth of Kingstown. Our mighty mother, Buck Mulligan said. He turned abruptly, his gray eyes searching from the sea to Stephen's face. The aunt thinks you killed your mother, he said. That's why she won't let me have anything to do with you. Someone killed her, Stephen said gloomily. You could have knelt down, damn it. Kinch, when your dying mother asked you, Buck Mulligan said, I'm Hyperborean as much as you, but to think of your mother begging you with her last breath to kneel down and pray for her, and you refused. There's something sinister in you. He broke off and lathered again lightly his farther cheek. A tolerant smile curled his lips. But a lovely mummer, he murmured to himself, Kinch, the loveliest mummer of them all. He shaved evenly and with care, in silence, seriously. Stephen, an elbow rested against the jagged granite, leaned his palm against his brow and gazed at the fraying edge of his shiny black coat sleeve. Pain, that was not yet the pain of love, fretted his heart. Silently in a dream, she had come to him after her death, her wasted body within its loose brown grave clothes, giving off an odor of wax and rosewood. Her breath, that had bent upon him, mute, reproachful, a faint odor of wetted ashes. Across the threadbare cuff edge, he saw the sea hailed as a great sweet mother by the well-fed voice beside him. The ring of the bay and the skyline held a dull green mass of liquid. A bowl of white china had stood beside her deathbed, holding the green sluggish bile from which she had torn up from her rotting liver by fits of loud, groaning vomiting. Buck Mulligan wiped again his razor blade. Ah, poor dog's body, he said in a kind voice. I must give you a shirt and a few nose rags. How are the second-hand breeks? They fit well enough, Stephen answered. Buck Mulligan attacked the hollow beneath his underlip. The mockery of it, he said contentedly. Second leg they should be. God knows what poxy ballsy left them off. I have a lovely pair with a hair-striped gray. You look spiffing in them. I'm not joking, Kinch. You look damn well when you're dressed. Thanks, Stephen said. I can't wear them if they're gray. He can't wear them, Buck Mulligan told his face in the mirror. Etiquette is etiquette. He kills his mother, but he can't wear gray trousers. Oh. He folded his razor neatly and with stroking palps of fingers felt the smooth skin. Stephen turned his gaze from the sea and plump face with its smoke and to the plump face with its smoke blue mobile eyes. That fellow I was with in the ship last night, said Buck Mulligan, says you have GPI. He's up in Dottyville with Connolly Norman. General paralysis of the insane. He swept a mere half circle in the air to flash the tidings abroad in sunlight now radiant on the sea. His curling, shaven lips laughed, and the edges of his white, glittering teeth. Laughter seized all his strong, well-knit trunk. Look at yourself, you dreadful bard. Stephen bent forward and peered at the mirror, held out to him, cleft by a crooked crack, hair on end, as he and others see me, who chose this face for me, this dog's body to rid of vermin. It asks me to. I pinched it out of the skivvy's room. Buck Mulligan said, it does her all right. The aunt always keeps plain-looking servants for Malachi. Always leads him not into temptation. And her name is Ursula. Laughing again, he brought the mirror away from Stephen's peering eyes. The rage of Caliban at not seeing his face in a mirror, he said, if Wilde were only alive to see you. Drawing back and pointing, Stephen said with bitterness, it is a symbol of Irish art. The cracked looking glass of a servant. Buck Mulligan suddenly linked his arm in Stephen's and walked with him around the tower, his razor and mirror clacking in the pocket where he had thrust them. It's not fair to tease you like that, Kinch, is it? He said kindly. God knows you have more spirit than any of them. Parried again, he fears the lancet of my art, as I fear that of his, the cold steel pen. Cracked looking glass of a servant. Tell that to the oxy chap downstairs and touch him for a guinea. He's stinking with money and thinks you're not a gentleman. His old fellow made tin by selling jalap to Zulus or some bloody swindle or other. God, Kinch, if you and I could only work together, we might do something for the island. Hellenize it. Cranley's arm. His arm. And to think of your having to beg from these swine. I'm the only one that knows what you are. Why don't you trust me more? What have you up your nose against me? Is it Haynes? If he makes any noise here, I'll bring down Seymour, and we'll give him a ragging worse than they gave Clive Kempthorne. Thorpe. Young shouts of moneyed voices. In Clive Kenthorpe's room, pale faces. They hold their ribs with laughter, one clasping another. Oh, I shall expire. Break the news to her gently, Aubrey. I shall die. With slit ribbons of his shirt whipping the air, he hops and hobbles around the table, with trousers down at heels, chased by aides of Magdalen, with the traitor's tailor shears. A scared calf's face, gilded with marmalade. I don't want to be debagged. Don't you play the giddy ox with me. Shouts from the open window, startling evening in the quadrangle. A deaf gardener, apron masked with Matthew Arnold's face, pushes his moor on the sombre lawn, watching narrowly the dancing motes of grass holmes. To ourselves, new paganism, omphalos. Let him stay, Stephen said. There's nothing wrong with him except at night. Then what is it? Buck Mulligan asked impatiently. Cough it up. I'm quite frank with you. What have you against me now? They halted, looking toward the blunt cape of Brayhead that lay on the water like the snout of a sleeping whale. Stephen freed his arms quietly. Do you wish me to tell you? He asked. Yes, what is it? Buck Mulligan answered. I don't remember anything. He looked in Stephen's face as he spoke. A light wind passed his brow, fanning softly his fair, uncombed hair, and stirring silver points of anxiety in his eyes. Stephen, depressed by his own voice, said, Do you remember the first day I went to your house after my mother's death? Buck Mulligan frowned quickly and said, What? Where? I can't remember anything. I remember only ideas and sensations. Why? What happened in the name of God? You were making tea, Stephen said, and went across the landing to get more hot water. Your mother and some visitor came out of the drawing room. She asked you who was in your room. Yes. Buck Mulligan said, What did I say? I forget. You said. Stephen answered, Oh, it's only Daedalus, whose mother is beastly dead. A flush which made him seem younger and more engaging rose to Buck Mulligan's cheek. Did I say that? He asked. Well, what harm is that? He shook his constraint from him nervously. And what is death? He asked. Your mother's or yours or my own. You only saw your mother die. I see them pop off every day in the Mater and Richmond and cut up into tripes in the dissecting room. It's a beastly thing and nothing else. It simply doesn't matter. You wouldn't kneel down to pray for your mother on her deathbed when she asked you. Why? Because you have the cursed Jesuit strain in you. It's injected the wrong way. To me, it's all a mockery and beastly. Her cerebral lobes are not functioning. She calls the doctor Sir Peter Teasel and picks buttercups off the quilt. Humor her till it's over. You crossed her last wish in death, and yet you sulk with me because I don't whinge, like some hired mute from Lulutz. Absurd. I suppose I did say it. I didn't mean to offend the memory of your mother. He had spoken himself into boldness. Stephen, shielding the gaping wounds which the word had left in his heart, said very coldly, I am not thinking of the offense to my mother. Of what, then? Buck Mulligan asked. Of the offense to me, Stephen answered. Buck Mulligan swung round on his heel. Oh, an impossible person, he exclaimed. He walked off quietly around the parapet. Stephen stood at his post, gazing over the calm sea toward the headland. Sea and headland now grew dim. Pulses were beating in his eyes, veiling their sight, and he felt the fever on his cheeks. A voice within the tower called loudly, Are you up there, Mulligan? I'm coming, Buck Mulligan answered. He turned toward Stephen and said, Look at the sea. What does it care about offenses? Chuck Loyola, Kinch, and come on down. The Sassenach wants his morning rashers. His head halted again for a moment at the top of the staircase, level with the roof. Don't mope over it all day, he said. I'm inconsequent. Give up the moody brooding. His head vanished, but the drone of the descending voice boomed out the stairhead. Wood shadows floated silently by through the morning peace from the stairhead seaward, where he gazed. Inshore and farther out, the mirror of water whitened, spurned by light-shot hurrying feet, white breast of the dim sea, the twining stresses 2 by 2, a hand plucking the harp strings, merging their twinging chords, wave-white wetted words shimmering on the dim tide. A cloud began to cover the sun slowly, wholly, shadowing the bay in deeper green. It lay beneath him, a bowl of bitter waters. Fergus's song. I sang it alone in the house, holding down the long dark chords. Her door was open. She wanted to hear my music. Silent with awe and pity, I went to her bedside. She was crying in her wretched bed. For those words, Stephen, love's bitter mystery. Where now? Her secrets, old feather fans, tasseled dance cards powdered with musk, a gaud of amber beads in her locked drawer, a bird cage hung in the sunny window of her house when she was a girl. She heard old Royce sing in the pantomime of Turco the Terrible, and laughed with others when he sang phantasmal mirth, folded away, musk-perfumed, and no more turned aside and brood, folded away in the memory of nature with her toys. Memories beset his brooding brain, her glass of water from the kitchen tap when she had approached the sacrament, a cord apple filled with brown sugar roasted for her at the hob of a dark autumn evening, her shapely fingernails reddened by the blood of squashed lice from the children's shirts. In a dream, silently she had come to him, her wasted body within its loose grave clothes giving an often odor of wax and rosewood. Her breath bent over him with mute, secret words, a faint odor of wetted ashes. Her glazing eyes, staring out of death, to shake and bend my soul. On me alone, the ghost candle to light her agony, ghostly light on the tortured face, her hoarse, loud breath rattling in horror, while all prayed on their knees, her eyes on me to strike me down. Liliata rutilantia tium te confessorum terma circumdent. Illubitanium te virginum chorus excipiat. Ghoul, chewer of corpses. No mother, let me be and let me live. Kinch ahoy. Buck Mulligan's voice sang from within the tower. It came near up the staircase, calling again. Stephen, still trembling at his soul's cry, heard warm morning sunlight, and in the air behind him friendly words. Daedalus, come down like a good mosey. Breakfast is ready. Haynes is apologizing for waking us last night. It's all right. I'm coming, Stephen said, turning. Do, for Jesus' sake, Buck Mulligan said, for my sake and all our sakes. His head disappeared and reappeared. I told him, your symbol of Irish art. He says it's very clever. Touch him for a quid, will you? A guinea, I mean. I get paid this morning, Stephen said. The school kip, Buck Mulligan said. How much? 4 quid? Lend us one. If you want it, Stephen said. 4 shining sovereigns, Buck Mulligan cried with delight. We'll have a glorious drunk to astonish the druidly druids. 4 omnipotent sovereigns. He flung up his hands and trampled down the stone stairs, singing out of tune with a Cockney accent. Warm sunshine marrying over the sea. The nickel shaving bowl shone, forgotten, on the parapet. Why should I bring it down? Or leave it there all day, forgotten friendship. He went over to it, held it in his hands a while, feeling its coolness, smelling the clammy slaver of the lather in which the brush was stuck. So I carried the boat of incense then at Clongowes. I am another now, and yet the same, a servant too, a server of a servant. In the gloomy, doomed living room of the tower, Buck Mulligan's gowned form moved briskly to and fro about the hearth, hiding and revealing its yellow glow. 2 shafts of soft daylight fell across the flagged floor from the high barbicans, and the meeting of their rays, a cloud of coal smoke and fumes of fried grease floating, turning. Will be choked, Buck Mulligan said. Haynes, open that door, will you? Stephen laid the shaving bowl on the locker. A tall figure rose from the hammock where it had been sitting, went to the doorway and pulled open the inner doors. Have you the key? A voice asked. Daedalus has it, Buck Mulligan said. Janny Mac unchoked. He howled without looking up from the fire. Kinch, it's in the lock, Stephen said, coming forward. The key scraped round harshly twice, and the heavy door had been set ajar. Welcome light and bright air entered. Haynes stood at the doorway looking out. Stephen hailed his upended valise to the table and sat down to wait. Buck Mulligan tossed the fry on the dish beside him. Then he carried the dish and a large teapot over to the table, set them down heavily and sighed with relief. I'm melting, he said, as the candle remarked when... But hush, not a word more on that subject. Kinch, wake up. Bread, butter, honey, Haynes, come in. The grub is ready. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts. Where's the sugar? O Jay, there's no milk. Stephen fetched the loaf and the pot of honey and the butter cooler from the locker. Buck Mulligan sat down in a sudden pet. What sort of kip is this? He said. I told her to come after 8. We can drink it back, Stephen said thirstily. There's a lemon in the locker. Oh, damn you and your Paris fads, Buck Mulligan said. I want sandy clove milk. Haynes came in from the doorway and said quietly, That woman is coming up with the milk. The blessings of God on you, Buck Mulligan cried, jumping up from his chair. Sit down. Pour out the tea there. The sugar is in the bag. Here, I can't go fumbling at the damned eggs. He hacked through the fry on the dish and slapped it out on 3 plates, saying, In nome Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Haynes sat down to pour out the tea. I'm giving you 2 lumps each, he said, but I say, Mulligan, you do make strong tea, don't you? Buck Mulligan, hewing thick slices from the loaf, said in an old woman's wheedling voice, When I makes tea, as old Mother Grogan said, and when I makes water, By Jove, it is tea, Haynes said. Buck Mulligan went on hewing and wheedling. So I do, Mrs. Cahill, says he. Begob, man, says Miss Cahill. God send you, don't make them in one pot. He lunged towards his messmates in turn, a thick slice of bread impaled on his knife. That's folk, he said very earnestly, for your book, Haynes. 5 lines of text and 10 pages of notes about the folk and the fish gods of Dundrum, printed by the Weird Sisters in the year of Big Wind. He turned to Stephen and asked in a fine, puzzled voice, lifting his brows, Can you recall, brother, is Mother Grogan's tea and water pot spoken of in the Mabinogion, or is it in the Upanishads? I doubt it, said Stephen gravely. Do you now? Buck Mulligan said in the same tone. Your reasons, pray? I fancy, Stephen said as he ate, it did not exist in or out of the Mabinogion. Mother Grogan was, one imagines, a kinswoman of Mary Ann. Buck Mulligan's face smiled with delight. Charming, he said in a finical, sweet voice, showing his white teeth and blinking his eyes pleasantly. Do you think she was? Quite charming. Then suddenly, overclouding all his features, he growled in a hoarse and rasping voice as he hewed again vigorously at the loaf. He crammed his mouth with fry and munched and droned. The doorway was darkened by an entering form. The milk, sir. Come in, ma'am, Mulligan said. Kinch, get the jug. An old woman came forward and stood by Stephen's elbow. That's a lovely morning, sir, she said. Glory be to God. To whom? Mulligan said, glancing at her. Ah, to be sure. Stephen reached back and took the milk jug from the locker. The islanders, Mulligan said to Haynes casually, speak frequently of the collector of prepuces. Excuse me. How much, sir? Asked the old woman. A quart, Stephen said. He watched her pour into the measure and thence into a jug rich white milk. Not hers. Old shrunken Pap's. She poured again a measureful in a tilly. Old and secret she had entered from the morning world, maybe a messenger. She praised the goodness of the milk, pouring it out. Crouching by a patient cow at daybreak in the lush field, a witch on her toadstool, her wrinkled fingers quick at the squirting dugs. They lowed about her, whom they knew, dew sulky cattle, skin of the kine, and poor old woman, names given her in old times, a wandering crone, lowly form of an immoral, serving her conqueror and her gay betrayer, their common Coquien, a messenger from the secret morning, to serve her to upbraid, whether he could not tell, but scorned to beg her favor. It is indeed, ma'am, Buck Mulligan said, pouring milk into their cups. Taste it, sir, she said. He drank at her bidding. If we could live on good food like that, he said to her somewhat loudly, we wouldn't have a country full of rotted teeth and rotted guts. Living in a bog swamp, eating cheap food in the streets paved with dust, horse dung, and consumptive spits. Are you a medical student, sir? The old woman asked. I am, ma'am, Buck Mulligan answered. Look at that now, she said. Stephen listened in a scornful silence. She bows her old head to a voice that speaks to her loudly, her bone setter, her medicine man. Me she slights, to the voice that will shrive in oil for the grave. All there is of her but her woman's unclean loins, of man's flesh, made not in God's likeness, the serpent's prey, and to the loud voice that now bids her be silent with wandering unsteady eyes. Do you understand what he says? Stephen asked her. Is it French you are talking, sir? The old woman says to Haynes. Haynes spoke to her again, a longer speech confidently. Irish, Buck Mulligan said. Is there Gaelic on you? I thought it was Irish, she said by the sound of it. Are you from the West, sir? I am an Englishman, Haynes answered. He's English, Buck Mulligan said, and he thinks we ought to speak Irish in Ireland. Sure we do, the old woman said, and I'm ashamed I don't speak the language myself. I'm told it's a grand language by them that knows. Grand is no name for it, said Buck Mulligan. Wonderful entirely. Fill us out some more tea, Kinch. Would you like a cup, ma'am? No, thank you, sir, the old woman said, slipping the ring off the milk can on her forearm, about to go. Haynes said to her, Have you your bill? We had better pay her, Mulligan, hadn't we? Stephen filled again the 3 cups. Bill, sir? She said, halting. Well, it's 7 mornings a pint, add 2 pence, and 7 twos is a shilling and 2 pence over, and these 3 mornings, a quart at 4 pence, is 3 quarts, is a shilling. That's a shilling and 1 and 2 is 2 and 2, sir. Buck Mulligan sighed, and having filled his mouth with a crusty, thickly buttered on both sides, stretched forth his legs and began to search his trouser pockets. Pay up and look pleasant, Haynes said to him, smiling. Stephen filled a 3rd cup, a spoonful of tea coloring faintly the rich, thick milk. Buck Mulligan brought up a florin, twisted it round his fingers, and cried, A miracle! He passed it along the table towards the old woman, saying, Ask nothing more of me, sweet. All I can give you I give. Stephen laid the coin in her uneager hand. We'll owe the 2 pence, he said. Time enough, sir, she said, taking the coin. Time enough. Good morning, sir. She curtsied and went out, followed by Buck Mulligan's tender chant. He turned to Stephen and said, Seriously, Douglas, I'm stony. Hurry out to your school, Kip, and bring us back some money. Today the bards must drink and junket. Ireland expects that every man in the state will do his duty. That reminds me, Haynes said, that I have to visit your National Library today. Our swim first, Buck Mulligan said. He turned to Stephen and asked blandly, Is this the day for your monthly wash, Kinch? But he said to Haynes, The unclean bard makes a point of washing once a month. All Ireland is washed by the Gulf Stream, Stephen said as he let honey trickle over a slice of the loaf. Haynes, from a corner where he was knotting easily a scarf about the loose collar of his tennis shirt, spoke. I intend to make a collection of your sayings if you will let me. Speaking to me, they wash and tub and scrub. Agent bite of inwit, conscious. Yet here's the spot. That one about the cracked looking-glass of servant being the symbol of Irish art is deuced good. Buck Mulligan kicked Stephen's foot onto the table and said with warmth of tone, Wait till you hear him on Hamlet, Haynes. Well, I mean it, Haynes said, still speaking to Stephen. I was just thinking of it when that poor old creature came in. Would I make any money by it? Stephen asked. Haynes laughed as he took off his soft gray hat from the holdfast of the hammock and said, I don't know, I'm sure. He strolled out to the doorway. Buck Mulligan bent across to Stephen and said with coarse vigor, You put your hoof in it now. What would you say that for? Well, Stephen said, the problem is to get money. From whom? From the milkman or from him? It's a toss-up, I think. I blew him out about you, Buck Mulligan said. And then you come along with your lousy leer and your gloomy Jesuit jibes. I see little hope, Stephen said, from her or from him. Buck Mulligan sighed tragically and laid his hand on Stephen's arm. From me, Kinch, he said. In a suddenly changed tone, he added, To tell you the God's truth, I think you're right. Damn all else they're good for. Why don't you pay them as I do? To hell with them all. Let us get out of this, Kip. He stood up, gravely ungirdled, and disrobed himself out of his gown, saying resignedly, Mulligan is stripped of his garments. He emptied his pockets on the table. There's your snot rag, he said. And putting on his stiff collar and rebellious tie, he spoke to them, chiding them, and his dangling watch chain. His hands plunged and rummaged in his trunk while he called for a clean handkerchief. God will simply have to dress the character. Want puce boots and These gloves and green boots. Contradiction. Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. Mercurial Malachi. A limp black missile flew out of his talking hands. And there's your Latin quarter-hat, he said. Stephen picked it up and put it on. Haynes called to them from the doorway. Are you coming, you fellows? I'm ready, Buck Mulligan answered, going towards the door. Come out, Clinch. You have eaten all we have left. All we left, I suppose. Resigned, he passed out with grave words and gait, saying well nigh with sorrow, and going forth he met Butterly. Stephen, taking his ash plant from its leaning place, followed them out, and, as they went down the ladder, pulled the slow iron door and locked it. He put the huge key in his inner pocket. At the foot of the ladder, Buck Mulligan asked, Did you bring the key? I have it, Stephen said, preceding them. He went on. Behind him he heard Buck Mulligan's club with his heavy bath towel and the leader of shoots of ferns or grasses. Down, sir. How dare you, sir? Haynes asked. Do you pay the rent for this tower? 12 quid, Buck Mulligan said. To the Secretary of the State of War. Stephen added over his shoulder. They halted while Haynes surveyed the tower and said at last, Rather bleak in the winter time, I should say. Martello, you call it. Billy Pitt had them built, Buck Mulligan said, when the French were on the sea, but ours is in Omphalos. What is your idea of Hamlet? Haynes asked Stephen. No, Buck Mulligan shouted in pain. I'm not equal to Thomas Aquinas and the 55 reasons he has made out to prop it up. Wait till I have a few pints in me first. He turned to Stephen, saying, as he pulled down neatly the peaks of his primrose waistcoat, You couldn't manage it under 3 pints, Kinch, could you? It has waited so long, Stephen said listlessly. It can wait longer. You pique my curiosity, Hayden said amiably. Is it some paradox? Pooh, Buck Mulligan said. We have grown out of wild and paradoxes. It's quite simple. He proves by algebra that Hamlet's grandson is Shakespeare's grandfather and that he himself is the ghost of his own father. What? Haynes said, beginning to point at Stephen. He himself? Buck Mulligan slung his tall stole-wise round his neck and, bending in loose laughter, said to Stephen's ear, Oh, shade of Kinch the Alder Japhett in search of a father? We're always tired in the morning, Stephen said to Haynes, and it is rather long to tell. Buck Mulligan walked forward again, raising his hands. The sacred pint alone can unbind the tongue of Daedalus, he says. I mean to say, Haynes explained to Stephen as they followed, this tower and these cliffs here, they remind me somehow of Elsinore, that beetles over the base into the sea, isn't it? Buck Mulligan turned suddenly for an instant towards Stephen, but did not speak. In the bright, silent instant, Stephen saw his own image in cheap, dusty mourning between their gay attires. It's a wonderful tale, Haynes said, bringing him to a halt again. Eyes pale as the sea, the wind had freshened. Paler, firm, and prudent. The sea's ruler, he gazed southward over the bay, empty save for the smoke plume of the mailboat vague on the bright skyline and a sail tacking by the Muglins. I read a theological interpretation of it somewhere, he said, bemused. The father and the son idea, the son striving to be atoned with the father. Buck Mulligan at once put on a blithe, broadly smiling face. He looked at them, his well-shaped mouth open happily, his eyes, from which he had suddenly withdrawn all shrewd sense, blinking with mad gaiety. He moved a doll's head to and fro, the brims of his Panama hat quivering, and began to chant in a quiet, happy, foolish voice. He held up a forefinger of warning. He tugged swiftly at Stephen's ash plant in farewell, running forward to a brow of the cliff, fluttered his hands at his sides like fins or wings or of one about to rise to the air enchanted. He capered before them down towards the 40-foot hole, fluttering his wing-like hands, leaping nimbly, Mercury's hat quivering in the fresh wind that bore back to them his brief bird-sweet cries. Haynes, who had been laughing guardedly, walked on beside Stephen and said, We oughtn't laugh, I suppose. He's rather blasphemous. I'm not a believer myself, that is to say. Still, his gaiety takes the harm out of it somehow, doesn't it? What did he call it? Joseph the Joiner? The Ballad of Joking Jesus, Stephen answered. Oh, Haynes said. You've heard it before. 3 times a day after meals, Stephen said dryly. You're not a believer, are you? Haynes asked. I mean a believer in the narrow sense of the word, creation from nothing and miracles and a personal God. There's only one sense of the word, it seems to me, Stephen said. Haynes stopped to take out a smooth silver case in which twinkled a green stone. He sprang it open with his thumb and offered it. Thank you, Stephen said, taking a cigarette. Haynes helped himself and snapped the case too. He put it back in his side pocket and took from his waistcoat pocket a nickel tinderbox, sprang it open too, and having lit his cigarette, held the flaming spunk toward Stephen in the shell of his hands. Yes, of course, he said, as they went on again. Either you believe or you don't, is it? Personally, I couldn't stomach the idea of a personal God. You don't stand for that, I suppose. You behold in me, Stephen said with grim displeasure, a horrible example of free thought. He walked on, waiting to be spoken to, trailing his ash plant by his side, its furrow followed lightly on the path, squealing at his heels, my familiar after me calling, Stephen! A wavering line along the path. They will walk on it tonight, coming here in the dark. He wants that key. It is mine. I paid the rent. Now I eat his salt bread. Give him the key, too. All. He will ask for it. That was in his eyes. After all, Haynes began. Stephen turned and saw that the cold gaze which had measured him was not all unkind. After all, I should think you are able to free yourself. You are your own master, it seems to me. I am the servant of 2 masters, Stephen said, an English and an Italian. Italian, Haynes said. A crazy queen, old and jealous. Kneel down before me. And a third, Stephen said. There is who wants me for odd jobs. Italian? Haynes said again. What do you mean? The Imperial British State, Stephen answered, his color rising in the Holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church. Haynes detached from his underlip some fibers of tobacco before he spoke. I can quite understand that, he said calmly. An Irishman must think like that, I dare say. We feel in England that we have treated you rather unfairly. It seems history is to blame. The proud potent titles changed over Stephen's memory like the triumph of their brazen bells. Et unam sanctum Catholicum et Apostolicum Ecclesiam, the slow growth and change of rite and dogma, like his own rare thoughts, a chemistry of stars. Symbol of the apostles and the Mass for Pope Marcellus. The voices blended, singing alone aloud in affirmation, and blended their chant and vigilant angel of the church militant disarmed and menaced her heresiarchs. A horde of heresies fleeing with might away. Phoeus, and the brood of mockers, of whom Mulligan was one, and Arius warring his life long upon the consubstantiality of his son with the Father, and Valentine spurning Christ's terrene body, and the subtle African heresiarch Sibelius, who held that the Father was himself his own son. Words Mulligan had spoken a moment since in mockery to the stranger, idle mockery. The void awaits, surely all of them that weave the wind, a menace, a disarming, and a worsting from those embattled angels of the church, Michael's host, who defend her ever in the hour of conflict with their lances and their shields. Hear, hear, prolonged applause. Zut, nom de Dieu. Of course, I'm a Britisher, Haynes' voice said, and as I feel one, I don't want to see my country fall into the hand of German Jews either. That's our national problem, I'm afraid, just now. 2 men stood at the verge of the cliff watching. businessman, boatman. She's making for Bullock Harbor. The boatman nodded towards the north of the bay with some disdain. There's 5 fathoms out there. He said it'll be swept up in that way when the tide comes in about 1. It's 9 days today. That man that was drowned. A sail veering about the blank bay waiting for a swollen bundle to bob up, roll over to the sun, a puffy face, salt white. Here I am. They followed the winding path down to the creek. Buck Mulligan stood on a stone in his shirt sleeves, his unclipped tie rippling over his shoulder. A young man clinging to a spur of rock near him moved slowly frog-wise, his green legs in the deep jelly of the water. Is the brother with you, Malachi? Down in Westmeath with the Bannons. Still there? I got a card from Bannon. It says he found a sweet young thing down there. Photo girl, he calls her. A snapshot, brief exposure. Buck Mulligan sat down to unlace his boots, and an elderly man shot up near the spur of the rock, a glowing red face. He scrambled up by the stones, water glistening on his pate and on its garland of gray hair, water riling over his chest and paunch, and spilling jets out of his black, sagging loincloth. Buck Mulligan made way for him to scramble past. Glancing at Haynes and Stephen, crossed himself piously with his thumbnail at brow and lip and breastbone. Seymour's back in town, the young man said, gasping again, his spur of rock. Trucked medicine and going in for the army. Ah, go to God, Buck Mulligan said. Coming over next week to stew. You know that Red Carlisle girl, Lily? Yes. Spooning with him last night on the pier. The father is Rhoda with money. Is she up the pole? Better ask Seymour that. Seymour a bleeding officer? Buck Mulligan said. He nodded to himself as he drew off his trousers and stood up, saying tritely, red-headed women buck like goats. He broke off in alarm, feeling his side under his flapping shirt. My 12th rib is gone, he cried. I'm the Ubermensch, toothless Kinch and I, the Supermen. He struggled out of his shirt and flung it beside him to where his clothes lay. Are you going in there, Malachi? Yes, make room in the bed. The young man shoved himself backward through the water and reached the middle of the creek in 2 long, clean strokes. Haynes sat down on a stone, smoking. Are you not coming in? Buck Mulligan asked. Later on, Haynes said. Not on my breakfast. Stephen turned away. I'm going, Mulligan, he said. Give us that key, Kinch, Buck Mulligan said, to keep my chemist flat. Stephen handed him the key. Buck Mulligan laid it across his heaped clothes. And 2 pence, he said, for a pint. Throw it there. Stephen threw 2 pennies on the soft heap. Undressing, Buck Mulligan erect, with joined hands before him, said sullenly, He who stealeth from the poor lendeth to Lord. Thus speaks Zarathustra. His plump body plunged. We'll see you again, Haynes said, turning as Stephen walked up the path and smiling at the wild Irish. Horn of a bull, hoof of a horse, smile of a Saxon. The ship, Buck Mulligan cried, 12:30. Good, Stephen said. He walked along the upward curving path, the priest's grey nimbus, in a niche where he dressed discreetly. I'll not sleep here tonight. Home I cannot go. A voice, sweetened and sustained, called to him from the sea. Turning the curve, he waved his hand. It called again. A sleek brown head, a seal's, far out on the water, round. Usurper. You, Cochrane, what city sent for him? Tarentum, sir. Very good. Well, there was a battle, sir. Very good. Where? The boy's blank face asked the blank window, farbled by the totters of memory, and yet it was in some way, if not memory fabled it, a phrase then of impatience, thud of Blake swings, of excess. I hear ruins of all space, shattered glass and toppling masonry, and time one livid finial flame. What's left then? I forget the place, sir. 279 BC. Ascalon, Stephen said, glancing at the name and date in the Gorse Guard book. Yes, sir, he said. Another victory like that and we're done for. That phrase the world had remembered. A dullies of the mind, from a hill above corpse-strewn plain, a general speaking to his officers, leaned upon his spear. Any general to his officers, to any officers, they lend ear. You, Armstrong, Stephen said. What was the end of Perseus? End of Perseus, sir? I know, sir. Ask me, sir, Coleman said. Wait, you, Armstrong, do you know anything about Perseus? A bag of fig rolls lay snugly in Armstrong's satchel. He curled them between his palms at whiles and swallowed them softly. Crumbs adhered to the tissue of his lips. A sweetened voice breath, well-off people, proud. Their eldest son was in the Navy. Vigo Road, Delki. Pirhos, sir, Pirhos appear. All laughed. Mirthless, high, malicious laughter. Armstrong looked round at his classmates, silly glee in profile. In a moment they will laugh more loudly, aware of my lack of rule and the fees their papas pay. Tell me now, Stephen said, poking the boy's shoulder with the book. What is a pier? A pier, sir, Armstrong said. A thing out in the water, a kind of bridge. Kingstown Pier, sir. Some laughed again, mirthless, but with meaning. Two in the back bench whispered. Yes. They knew, had never learned, nor ever been innocent. All, with envy, he watched their faces. Edith, Ethel, Gertie, Lily, their likes, their breaths, too, sweetened with tea and jam, their bracelets tittering in the struggle. Kingstown Pier, Stephen said. Yes, a disappointed bridge. The words troubled their gaze. How, sir? Common asked. A bridge is across a river. For Haynes' chapbook. No one here to hear. Tonight, deftly amid wild drink and talk, to pierce the polished mail of his mind. What then? A Jasper at the court of his master, indulged and esteemed, winning a Clement's master praise. Why had they chosen all that part? Not wholly for the smooth caress. For them, too, history was a tale like any other too often heard. Their land a pawnshop. Had Pyrrhus not fallen by Beldam's hand in Argos, or Julius Caesar had not been knifed to death, they are not to be thought away. Time has branded them and fettered. They are lodged in the room of infinite possibilities they have ousted. But can those have been possible, seeing that they never were? Or was the only possible which came to pass, weaver of the wind? Tell us a story, sir. Oh, do, sir. A ghost story. Where do you begin in this? Stephen asked, opening another book. Weep no more, Common said. Go on then, Talbot. And the story, sir? After, Stephen said. Go on, Talbot. A swarthy boy opened a book and propped it nimbly under the breastwork of his satchel. He recited jerks of verse with odd glances at the text. It must be a movement, then, an actuality of the possible as possible. Aristotle's phrase formed itself within the gabbled verses and floated out into the studio silence of the library of St. Genevieve, where he had read, sheltered from the sin of Paris night by night. By his elbow a dedicate Siamese conned a handbook of strategy. Fed and feeding brains about me, under glow lamps impaled, with faintly beating feelers, and in my mind's darkness a sloth of the underworld, reluctant to shy of brightness, shifting her dragon's scaly folds. Thought is the thought of thought, tranquil brightness. The soul is in a manner all that is. The soul is the form of forms, tranquility sudden, vast, candescent, form of forms. Talbot repeated. Turn over, Stephen said quietly. I don't see anything. What, sir? Talbot asked simply, bending forward. His hand turned the page over. He leaned back and went on again, having just remembered of him that walked the waves. Here also, over these craven hearts, his shadow lies, and on the scoffer's heart and lips on mine, it lies upon their eager faces, who offered him a coin of the tribute. To Caesar what is Caesar's, to God what is God's. A long look from dark eyes, a riddling sentence to be woven and woven on the church's looms. Aye. Talbot slid his closed book into his satchel. Have I heard all? Stephen asked. Yes, sir. Hockey at 10, sir. Half day, sir. Thursday. Who can answer a riddle? Stephen asked. They bundled their books away, pencils clacking and pages rustling. Crowded together, they strapped and buckled their satchels, all gabbling gaily. A riddle, sir. Ask me, sir. Oh, ask me, sir. A hard one, sir. This is the riddle, Stephen said. What is that? What, sir? Again, sir, we didn't hear. Their eyes grew bigger as the lines were repeated. After a silence, Cochrane said, What is it, sir? We give up. Stephen, his throat itching, answered, The fox burying his grandmother under a holly bush. He stood up and gave a shout of nervous laughter, to which their cries echoed dismay. A stick struck the door, and a voice in the corridor called, Hockey. They broke asunder, sliding out of their benches, leaping them. Quickly they were gone, and from the lumber room came the rattle of sticks and clamor of their boots and tongues. Sargent, who alone had lingered, came forward slowly, showing an open copybook. His thick hair and scraggly neck gave witness of unreadiness, and through his misty glasses weak eyes looked upon pleading. On his cheek, dull and bloodless, a soft stain of ink lay, date-shaped, recent and damp as a snail's bed. He held out his copybook. The word Psalms was written on the headline. Beneath were sloping figures, and at the foot of a crooked signature with blind loops and a blot, Cyril Sargent, his name and seal. Mr. Deasy told me to write them all out again, he said, and to show them to you, sir. Stephen touched the edges of the book. Futility. Do you understand now how to do them? He asked. Numbers 11 to 15, Sargent answered. Mr. Deasy said I was to copy them off the board, sir. Can you do them yourself? Stephen asked. No, sir. Ugly and futile, lean neck and thick hair, and a stain of ink, a snail's bed. Yet someone had loved him, borne him in her arms and in her heart. But for her, the race of the world would have trampled him underfoot, a squashed, boneless snail. She had loved his weak, weary, watery blood, drained from her own. Was that, then, real? The only true thing in his life, his mother's prostrate body, the fiery Columbanus, in holy zeal bestrode. She was no more, the trembling skeleton of a twig, burnt in the fire, an odor of rosewood and wetted ashes. She had saved him from being trampled underfoot and had gone, scarcely having been, a poor soul gone to heaven, and on a heath beneath winking stars, a fox, red reek of rapine in his fur, with merciless bright eyes that scraped in the earth, listened, scraped up the earth, listened, scraped and scraped. Sitting at his side, Stephen solved out the problem. He proves by algebra that Shakespeare's ghost is Hamlet's grandfather. Sargent peered askance through his slanted glasses. Hockey sticks rattled in the lumber room, the hollow knock of a ball, and calls across the field. Across the page the symbols moved in grave Morris, in the mummery of their letters, wearing quaint caps of squares and cubes. Give hands, traverse, bow to partner, so imps of fancy of the Moors, gone too from the world, Averroes and Moses, Maimonides, dark men in mind and movement, flashing in their mocking mirrors, and the obscure soul of the world, darkness shining in brightness, which brightness could not comprehend. Do you understand now? Can you work the second for yourself? Yes, sir. In long, shaky strokes, Sargent copied the data, waiting always for the word of help when his hand moved faithfully the unsteady symbols, a faint hue of shame flickering behind his dull skin. Armor matrice, subjective and objective genitive. With her weak blood and whey sour milk she had fed him and hid him from the sight of others, his swaddling bands. Like him was I, these sloping shoulders, this gracelessness. My childhood bends beside me, too far for me to lay a hand there once or lightly. Mine is far and his secret as our eyes. Secrets, silent, stony, sit in the dark palaces of both our hearts. Secrets weary of their tyranny, tyrants willing to be dethroned. The sum was done. "It is very simple," Stephen said as he stood up. "Thanks, sir." "Thanks," the sergeant answered. He dried the page with a sheet of thin blotting paper and carried his copybook back to the bench. "You had better get your stick and go out to the others," Stephen said as he followed towards the door, the boy's graceless form. "Yes, sir." In the corridor, his name was heard, called from the playfield. "Sergeant." "Run on," Stephen said. "Mr. Deasy is calling you." He stood in the porch and watched the laggard hurry toward the scrappy field where sharp voices were futile. They were sorted in teams, and Mr. Deasy came away, stepping over wisps of grass with gaited feet. When he had reached the schoolhouse's voices again contending called to him, he turned his angry white mustache. "What is it now?" he cried continually without listening. "Cochrane and Halliday are on the same side, sir," Stephen said. "Will you wait in my study for a moment," Mr. Deasy said, "till I restore order here?" And as he stepped fussily back across the field, his old man's voice cried sternly, "What is the matter? What is it now?" Their sharp voices cried about him on all sides. Their many forms tossed around him, the garish sunshine bleaching the honey of his ill-dyed head. Stale smoky air hung in the study with the smell of drab bathed leather of its chairs. As on the first day he bargained with me here, as it was in the beginning is now. On the sideboard the tray of Stuart coins, base treasure of a bog and ever shall be, and snug in their spoon case of purple plush, faded the 12 apostles, having preached to all the Gentiles, world without end. A hasty step over the stone porch in the corridor. Blowing out his rare mustache, Mr. Deasy halted at the table. "First, our little financial settlement," he said. He brought out his coat, a pocketbook bound by a leather thong. It slapped open, and he took from it 2 notes, one of joined halves, and laid them carefully on the table. "2," he said, strapping and stowing his pocketbook away. "And now, his strong room for the gold." Stephen's embarrassed hand moved over the shells, heaped in the cold stone mortar, whelks and money cowries and leopard shells, and this, world of an emir's turban, and this, the scallop of St. James, an old pilgrim's hoard, dead treasure, hollow shells. A sovereign fell bright and new on the soft pile of the tablecloth. 3, Mr. Deasy said, turning his little savings box about in his hand. "These are handy things to have. See, this is for sovereigns, this is for shillings, 6pences, half-crowns, and here, crowns. See?" He shot from it 2 crowns and 2 shillings. And I think we'll probably stop there for today. So I hope you enjoyed this story. I kind of really got into it. I like Ulysses a lot, so it's hard for me to stop. The first chapter is really long, and there's really no good stopping point. So that'll have to do for tonight, because we're at over an hour. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Saturday Night Stories. I invite you to connect with me on Facebook or Instagram. On Instagram, I have my other small social network things like Kik and Snapchat. If you feel like doing those as well, I try my best to get back to everybody as fast as I can. Keep in mind that I do work full time, so it doesn't always work out perfectly, but happy to talk. I have been getting things in the mail recently, which are awesome and really cool, and I'm hoping to show them off. I'll also be showing them off on my Facebook, and you can find all of the contact information on my channel page. Quite a few of my videos have direct links on it as well, and I hope to see you there. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have a great weekend, a great week coming up, and I hope I see you next week. See ya.